to you, Shirley.
Thank you, Ozzy, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all about this very topic that I'm very passionate about. And having worked many years within the UK, Australia, and also global around winning at the point of purchase, I could also, like the other speakers, spend all day talking about this, but I will try my best to whittle it down as much as I can. So. Firstly, what does the point winning at point of purchase mean? Well, just to get ourselves into the headspace on the specific area that we're talking about here is point of purchase, most commonly called the last moment of truth, is basically just before a shopper or when a shopper is actually about to make that final transaction. And it's a really pivotal point of the customer journey, as it could mean a customer choosing your brand or someone else's. And what it means by winning within this moment is basically it's a triple win. Firstly, the retailer, so to nail the transaction for them and make sure that and also potentially getting shoppers to spend a bit more, either through suggestive sell, cross-selling or upselling. The shopper winning from having a delightful experience and also the seamless buying experience, either offline or online, and also the brand enhancing their brand scores at this point in time as well. And for any initiative to be sustainable, you really have to have these three players winning at the same time. So in terms of when I was thinking about this, in terms of how to win in this moment and also get it right for our shoppers, I was thinking about not going into the nitty-gritties of the classic 5 Ps, and also not talking about execution, which are all really important, but actually what I wanted to focus really on, in my experience, having worked in big companies like Unilever, Nestle, McDonald's, and across the UK, Australia, and global, that are often areas that are not done the best by these businesses, to be honest, and more of an holistic point of view of opportunities for businesses to really sharpen. So how to win at this moment? Well, firstly, have a robust shopper marketing strategy and have it set right up front. So every business, I believe, that sells anything should have some sort of shopper marketing strategy, because often I see that some businesses just don't even have it. And also shopper marketing strategy should be grounded by shopper insights. This then translates to how we engage with shoppers in areas and also in areas where we want them to take notice. And also the shopper marketing strategy should be integrated within the overall marketing strategy and thought through at the same time as that, and ideally dovetail from a category strategy as well. So it's not seen as an afterthought at the execution phase, which I also often see it just kind of tagged on. And the other thing on top of that is, don't think it as an purely executional. Really, it should be embedded into the strategy right from the beginning. So it informs things like the creative direction, content, and also potentially on which channels you want to communicate as well. The second thing I think that's really important is that communication has to be relevant at the moment of truth. So shoppers are most often, they're not the same as a consumer. So think pet food, think baby food, think mom buying for the family. So it's a different type of language that you have to use when you're talking to a shopper. Be it digital or in-store experience, it's important that the initiatives that you've laid out through these type of programs such as loyalty is communicated in the most relevant way to shoppers at that point when they're about to buy, because often marketeers, they have a lot to say and they're tempted to communicate a lot at that point, but actually most of the time shoppers are either in a busy supermarket with potentially kids in tow, or they're hungry, they just want to order their food, they just want a really easy and quick experience, and making sure that we give them that by not communicating too much and also communicating the right thing. And especially also now that price is such a sensitive topic because of things like inflation, but just to remember that that's not just the only lever to pull. There's other levers like behavioral economics levers like badging, limited time only, 5-star ratings, all these to really nudge shoppers at the point of purchase, because really a lot of the time shoppers just want that shortcut to make that final decision. And also my suggestion is really to get that message right. My advice is really to lean into experts in the shopper marketing field, because they have, say, a different skill set to paid media. Thirdly, don't work in silos, think omni-channel. I think some of the other speakers mentioned things like omni-channel as well, and making sure that we talk to shoppers in a way that really we understand that they're actually looking at all these different things offline, online, between the lines, everywhere. It's no longer a linear path anymore, so we need to make sure that everything is looked at from an entire ecosystem point of view, and everything kind of connects. Things like loyalty programs, personalization needs to be integrated at the point of purchase in the right way, to make sure that the overall experience is given in an ideal situation, in an ideal way. This means that teams really have to work together internally, either in scrums or in project teams, really to make sure that there is that connection across the board. And that might require some cultural shift from your business, or structural shifts depending on where your organization is in terms of that connection. And also lastly, and really important and tying into today's topics, analytics and metrics. So I think Alex mentioned, KPIs. So you would have those right at the onset. So I don't want to repeat too much of what previous speakers have talked about, but really making sure that that measurement is happening not just after a campaign, or it's happening like within the campaign as well, and that constant ebb and flow of data to refine execution. And it's so much easier now with digital that you can actually refine executions and make things go live really quickly, and actually understand feedback quite quickly. So make sure we take advantage of this, the digital tools that we have. And then obviously at the end, or whatever the decision in terms of the timeline is, to measure it and measure the activity, and make sure that that information is used for future activities, because often people change roles and kind of forget what was done last year, or is not there for for what was done last year. So we need to make sure that we have that feedback loop always as well. And there's many measures out there that also Alex talked about in terms of all these. There's lots and lots of measures for point of purchases, like marketing mix models, A/B testing, quant data. But I think what's really important is to understand right at the onset of what data do you actually have access to right at the beginning, to be able to measure if you've done a good job or not, and make sure that that data is reliable. And also tech stack is a big thing as well, to make sure that actually, do you have the tech stack there to be able to measure things right from a customer clicking onto a splash page right through to purchase? Do you have that type of measurement and that technology to measure right from the word go? Typical metrics that you would use at the point of purchase would be things like conversion or brand scores, and also customer experience. But I think the most important thing here, and I think one of the other speakers also mentioned, is accountability, and making sure that there is a really strong team that actually is accountable for actually looking back or analyzing at that point in time, so that that basically the analytics is done, because a lot of the time is this, we have so much data now, but sometimes in some organization that mind shift hasn't happened in terms of using data to make decisions and having that growth mindset. So I think that's a really important journey that people need to go on, to make sure that they do use data in the best way that they can, and actually have access to it, and also have that omni-channel outlook as well. So lastly, just wanted to touch on the last kind of question that Ozzy posed to me, is how does winning at point of purchase work together with loyalty programs? Well, loyalty programs, obviously you can use them to really seal the deal at the point of purchase, if you show customers, what points you can earn and what you can burn. And it depends on your organization and how it's organized, but obviously collaboration, working with the shopper experts in the business as well as the loyalty experts to make sure that you have that joined up approach and that your communication at the point of purchase about loyalty is the right one. So for example, at the point of purchase, I wouldn't recommend that you communicate about a loyalty programs to drive awareness, because actually that distracts the customer from actually making that final transaction. So things like that the shopper team or shopper insights team will be able to kind of inform you to make the best decision in terms of communicating with your customer. So with that, if you just go to the last slide. Sorry, I'm a little bit over in time. So just the 3 key takeaways. Winning at the point of purchase means triple win: retailer, brand, and the shopper. Get the communication right at the shopper on the shopper level, not to a customer. They're different people. They're potentially different. And use metrics and analytics to really refine execution. And it has to be collaborative effort across the whole business, and make sure that you really work as a team to basically get the right message at the right time to the shoppers.
Awesome. Thank you. So if you can't stick around, we have you can always book a demo, so you can scan that code there, and we'll be taking questions. So if there's any questions, feel free to direct them to our lovely guests. I have a question actually, Shirley, with any kind of activity that happens in store, is there some kind of forecasting that is required?
Yes, in short, I think that's wise to at least, even if you haven't done the activity before, you pick a kind of similar activity that you've done previously to understand what type of impact you might have, which then obviously especially if it's in store, might impact the stock that you bring in, or the impact that you'll have with customers. So yeah, I think it's wise to actually understand and forecast before you do any activity.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyone else? For anyone else? No.
Hi everyone. I have a question myself, but I've also been texting a question as well from someone who had to leave. But I think I'll ask Francis's question after sort of mine, and I think this is potentially a selfish one for myself and Komo, and now we've got all the expert call. Of course, I'm going to make the most of it. So obviously, we've been taking a pretty deep look into loyalty over the past few months, and what we have found is that a lot of loyalty programs are missing what we feel is a key function, and that's what we're calling sort of true engagement. So that could be, and we've touched on it a couple of times throughout this session, is around value adding, personalized content, might be interactive content, gamification, competitions, etc., which all can be linked to rewards, but all about connecting and amplifying people's passion points, adding true value for the customer, and building that trust and relationship. So I'd really love to hear from all of you, some of you, one of you, on your thoughts on what role that, what we're calling true engagement, fits into loyalty programs. And do you, I guess, think that maybe either your own or others could be lacking or could be improved into that true engagement side of things?
I can pick that one up first. So within my program Nectar, a lot of the activity that we undertake with customers is single-mindedly to drive sales. However, what we also try to do is blend that more transactional set of activity with some more engaging activity. So within the Nectar app, we've got all sorts of little fun, sticky mechanics that help us just to engage with customers in between the big spikes of activity. So we regularly undertake data playbacks. So once a year, we tell customers what their top products across the year have been, and whether you've been the top buyer of Toblerone in the Tunbridge Wells Sainsbury's, which gets really great engagement and shares on social media. We also do little gamification pieces of activity to drive alternative types of behaviour. So the Sainsbury's brand promise is helping everyone eat better. So a couple of times a year, we do what we call the Great Big Fruit and Veg Challenge, which is challenging customers to fill up their baskets with more fresh produce, so fruit and veg, as the name suggests, and we reward them as part of the loyalty program for doing so. So you get rewarded for putting a red pepper or some tomatoes in your shopping basket, or buying more fresh veg than you would normally. So actually mixing those little engaging mechanics with the more here's an offer to get a discount on a particular product or some points on a particular product is really crucial for that ongoing engagement with the program, and therefore you can use that as the anchor to drive the kind of more transactional behavior that you want from customers.
Funny, I got an email from Qantas yesterday saying that I was in the top 10 flyers as far as miles achieved over the last 3 months or 6 months or something like that. And to me, that was like, oh, yeah, just like a little, oh. And my wife's sitting there going, yeah, it's probably not something to be proud of. Maybe you should stay home for longer. But no, I love it. And I think, Lisa, you said something along the lines of not every touch point needs to be lead to a direct sale, which I think is sort of in line with what
I love your question, because you'd think in a business like or a industry like health, that it would be easy, right? It feels win-win. It's good for our book if people claim less, that means they're healthier. It's good for them if they're healthier. But interestingly, Australians, if you look at the globe and how people tend to respond to their health, we're shit. We tend to get to age 65, drop off a cliff and go, oh, what happened? All of a sudden I'm unhealthy. If you look at other countries, typically across the board, people are better at proactively managing their health. And so one of the things we're really focused on is how can we get that message across? I think COVID's probably helped. It's helped to give that a bit of a kickstart and a bit of focus. So it's helped, pivot the attention a little bit more to this conversation. But I mean, I'm just back from a study tour in the States, and talk about the need to reward the right behavior in the area of health. Like, you can imagine if you're somebody that suffers from, say, a chronic disease, and the system over there is a lot more complicated, population's bigger, blah, blah, blah. But every time I go to the doctor, I get a new script, and then I've got a claim, and then there's a reason why, you're not going to make, the payment. And like, can you imagine your whole life with living with some chronic illness, which doesn't have to be, unmanageable, like diabetes, for example, but like just exhausting. And so actually giving, our customers a bit of a boost to say, you're doing the right thing. And then when they fall off the wagon and maybe they are exhausted and they're not going to appointments, actually starting to reach out and say, being more of a coach in that area, and how can we play a role to help you manage your health for you as much as for us, but for the benefit of yourself. And I think you can start with really small things. Like, I was reading the draft of an email the other day, and I love, Shirley, that you touched on the need for technology, and this is, my space. So I love that you mentioned that. But you can get very lost in the nuts and bolts and how things work, and actually forget to show up in the right way for your customers. So the email was something like, we can see you're going to hospital. Here's how you can claim. Would you like to, we're so mechanical. And I'm like, can't we just send them like a virtual bunch of flowers and say, hope you're feeling better? And maybe start there. Yeah. And so it's kind of building more of that two-way exchange, and like being a bit human about, how to go about building that relationship from my perspective.
That's huge. I love the bunch of flowers thing. And from our perspective, it's send them while they're waiting in the waiting room, send them a quick game to play.
Something like
fun
that,
while they're waiting to take their mind off what's coming next.
I might steal that game idea. I like that.
I might supply you with that game.
Can I ask you a question, Alex? You know how you mentioned that you're bringing in some of the gamified experiences to the shopping mission. When do you plan that? Is that part of your planning cycle at the beginning of the quarter, or have you thought out that year and said we're going to do this? At what point do you plan that would be an activity, or is it more tactical?
We've got a number of set plays, so kind of things that we do within the marketing calendar that are pretty regular. And then sometimes we're just thinking about them as quite tactical plays. To be honest with you, Oz, one of the things we're working on is how do we create that as a reusable feature within our app. So we have a more of a build as opposed to buy strategy, much to my wailing of gnashing of teeth with my friends in product. I would much rather kind of buy a product like yours and have it plugged into the app so I can kind of deploy straight from my team's desktop, as opposed to waiting for the tech team to build something fresh every time. We're getting better, but it does hamper us in our kind of responsiveness and our ability to react to what customers are doing in the moment. So it tends to be a bit set play, and we've got a few levers that we can pull tactically, but to have a toy box of games and little features that we could deploy at will would be my dream.
I think the other thing I'd say there, Joel, is you see this trend everywhere. You know, a lot of people really pride themselves on they acquired 500,000 new customers this year. It was fantastic acquisition numbers. And typically when you look at the churn out of new customers, it's much, much higher than obviously more deeply engaged customers. And a lot of people have a strategy of, onboarding in first 100 days is a fairly typical thing. We tend to look at the first year with the brand, and that's actually a much more focused level on engagement, awareness, not just all about driving the next shop or the next transaction. And I think peppering in things that are actually about driving awareness and education and engagement in the first year, because churn is typically 15-20% higher in the new customers churning out the following year, which has a massive impact on the business case. Because if you're getting 500,000, it's great, but then the following year only 60% of those stay with you, or whatever the number is. So I think there is important. I think the other part there is depending on the business. So if retail's different because it's fast, it's moving, and there's always something to try and have a conversation about. But if you are a telco and you've actually just bought a phone or whatever it's going to be, your next transaction is some ways away. So how do you utilize these types of things to keep engagement up with a relevant conversation and not always feeling like it's a sell? So I think there's a couple of parts there. And the third one, which I think is interesting that none of us have really talked about today, but if you take, say, a banking client, you're going to have customers in your life cycle that have previously been really high value. They've had mortgages, credit cards, whatever, term deposits, whatever they've had, but they're now, 65 plus, and they're no longer high value to the bank because they actually now own their own houses and what have you, but they've previously been a very high value and loyal customer to you. The problem is you can't afford to actually give away offers, etc., to them as much because you're not going to make money from those transactions. But our focus in those is often creating a group that we know they were previously high value and they're very high tenure. And the focus there is more about engagement and recognition at the call center, as an example, of being high value, because we can't really sell them anymore. And they're not, even if we try and do an offer, we won't make money from it. But they are our previous high value, and they have a very high intergenerational opportunity with their families and their kids about recommending the bank, as an example.
Julie, MPS and advocacy would play a role there for those customers.
Well, yeah, but you can't afford to give away too much to those customers because they're not going to make you any more money, but they are still very important to be recognised. So I think those sorts of engagement type activities and what have you are powerful use cases there.
I fill the gaps. Yeah, I mean, it feels like a lot of it all comes down to building trust, building relationships, and if you can, and adding value. And if you can do those three things, then the commercial returns that you're looking for will come. It's like build it and they will come type situation. But you build that trust, the relationship, and and keep adding value and doing that in a personalized way, then yeah, that's the mecca, I guess.
Yeah, and I think then actually proving that, that whatever it might be, a message or a cross-sell message coupled with an engagement message actually drives more value than just doing a cross-sell and a frequency without an engagement piece, and being able to track that to actually demonstrate that's incrementally better anyway.
I do have this one question from Francis. So his question was, how do we believe personalization connects into customers' passions and brand sponsorship deals? So Francis, being from Havas Media, lots in sports sponsorship, etc. He's the chief marketing and content officer there. So I can understand where his question is coming from. But anyone want to touch on any, I guess, history and brand sponsorships and loyalty?
Well,
I mean, I can talk.
yeah,
You go.
There you go.
Lisa can talk to Paralympics.
Yeah,
you-
I mean, we've just started sponsoring the Carlton Football Club, and I think, I mean, that was a fairly easy decision. You live in Melbourne, you sponsor an AFL team, tick. You've won kind of half the population, really. But no, I think actually, Oz, you've touched on the Paralympics, and I mean, I guess that's a really good example. But one of the things we're spending a lot of time talking about as a business at the moment is just kind of that whole social responsibility. And so, like, we want to be able to pick things where we're demonstrating that we actually care, because it's in our ethos, right? Particularly being a healthcare company. And whether or not people are interested in that particular cause is almost irrelevant, because we see evidence to say that people are interested in engaging with a brand because they have, good morality, a good moral compass, basically. I think there's a really good example of, like, if you look at people's Twitter handles and the different logos that they use, I think as a country, we really over-index in environmental. And so just starting to pick up on like what different interest areas are and how do you then reflect that, not just in your sponsorship deals, but also in your, your partnerships in terms of who you choose to do business with. I think it's really critical.
Beautiful. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Jules,
I
did you
guess.
want to add to that?
Look, I guess because, I mean, Ozzy, you could add just as much here. We've both worked in telcos where passion points was a huge part of the loyalty strategy.
Yeah, there too.
Yeah, so, both of us have worked in telcos where movies, music and sport were extreme components of the loyalty strategy, and that was really tapping into passion points. I think where it becomes really interesting is, if we take sport as an example, is people are, I mean, Lisa mentioned Carlton, people are extremely passionate about their sports. But what's interesting for the sport is, and for the brands and sponsorships, is a lot of people will sponsor a sporting event. What they want to get out of it is obviously trying to influence or drive awareness to the customers that are in that zone. Is how you can come up with a much more data-driven or data-led strategy where you're really understanding, almost like the fan ID, the type of ways people are consuming their passion points, and then being able to come up with almost like a data exchange type of opportunity where you can intermingle, who are the brand's customers and not the sporting customers, who are the sporting customers, not the brand customers. And I've worked on a few big plays there before, and they're extremely powerful. Obviously, it's all got to be in a privacy compliant way, but there is definitely ways to bring the communities together to drive much better commercial outcomes from their sponsorships, because a lot of the sponsorships, people don't necessarily have a brand awareness issue. What they really want to do is try and build a relationship with those customers, but whoever the customer is signed up to is owned by that group, but they want to try and influence. So if you take a lot of telcos and media companies, they spend all this money on digital rights deals and all these sorts of areas that they build, but quite often the value is right in with the data and working out what the data-led strategy is to support that. But I've seen it happen several times, and it's extremely powerful. It's complicated though, because there's lots of stakeholders involved with that. But I think it's extremely powerful.
I think just one. Oh, sorry. Just one last thing in terms of because obviously McDonald's sponsors FIFA as well. So I think it's going back to Julie's point about negotiating and making sure that you really because obviously FIFA is extremely expensive, being able to negotiate financially what you can get off it and the stream of how you can basically milk the profit from it. So we did a lot of delivery messages was where we wanted to push with sponsorship. So it's about, do you have a really strong hook with, linking yourself with that sponsorship as well?
Yeah, and I think the win-win there is if the nucleus of the strategy is fan engagement,
correct,
and that has a broader outcome, and fan engagement benefits multi-stakeholders. So it's actually then putting that. It's not necessarily about who the sponsor is or who's the owner of the rights or the sporting content. It's actually what's the fan engagement we can co-create together, and what's the better together strategy that's commercially viable between that.
It comes back to the same thing that we were just saying before. It's if you put the fan first, then everyone else will benefit from it. And Shirley, we've done a number of different campaigns with Maccas, as we call it here in Australia.
Yes.
Through Fox Sports and their sponsorship of or your sponsorship of Cricket Australia. And another one which comes to mind is, and they've just signed a new multi-year renewal with us, is QBE. And they're not necessarily a brand that you'd want to or think about engaging with at a sports game. They sponsor the Sydney Swans and the Sydney Swifts. But they utilise the Komo platform to amplify their messaging in stadium, connect with the fans about the Swans, the Swifts. But it's a big data play, right? So they're getting a good percentage of the fans in stadium engaging with the brand. The brand recall rates are going to be higher. Brand affinity is going to be better. They're getting first-party data. They're enriching it with zero-party data all through a 1 or 2 minute halftime activation, for example. So I think that's a big role with our platform and gamification in general, is how do you connect with people's passions when you wouldn't necessarily have the ability to do that through a brand like a QBE.
Cool.
Yep.